friends. It's your teen and tween librarian, Rebecca, and we are back for the final episode of Bedtime Stories. That's right, you heard it right. Final. For now. We are going to finish up Journey to the Center of the Earth tonight. It's been a long ride. We've been doing this since the end of March, and I'm so proud of all of us for sticking with it. Tonight we are going to actually have 2 chapters so we can finish up the story, and we get to find out what happens to our poor, intrepid explorers. If you remember last episode, our team was shooting up the chimney of a volcano mid-eruption, and not doing so great. Axel's description of that kind of reminded me of one of those final scenes from Lord of the Rings when Frodo is standing over the lava and he's just all like dirty and hot and sweaty and tired. That's basically what I thought of, although to be fair, Lord of the Rings is in my head most of the time. So let's get into chapter 44 and 45 of Journey to the Center of the Earth. Enjoy. Chapter 44. Back to the surface. When I opened my eyes again, I felt the guide's strong hand holding my belt. With his other hand, he was supporting my uncle. I was not seriously injured, but simply bruised all over. I found myself lying on a mountain slope, only a few feet from an abyss into which I would have fallen at the slightest movement. Hans had saved my life while I was rolling down the side of the crater. "Where are we?" asked my uncle, who seemed to be extremely annoyed at being back on the surface of the earth. The guide shrugged his shoulders to express complete ignorance. "In Iceland," I said. "Nay," retorted Hans. "What? Not in Iceland?" cried the professor. "Hans must be wrong," I said, sitting up. After the countless surprises of our journey, one more had been reserved for us. I expected to see a cone covered with perpetual snow in the midst of the barren deserts of the north, under the pale rays of the polar sky and beyond the highest latitudes. But contrary to all these expectations, my uncle, the Icelander, and I were lying halfway down a mountain baked by the rays of a scorching sun. I could not believe my eyes, but the absolute roasting to which my body was being subjected left no room for doubt. We had come out of the crater half naked, and the radiant orb from which we had demanded nothing for 2 months was lavishing a fierce light on us. When my eyes had grown accustomed to this brilliance, with which they had become unfamiliar, I used them to rectify the errors of my imagination. I wanted to be at Spitzbergen at the very least, and I was in no mood to accept anything else. The professor was the first to speak up, saying, "It certainly doesn't look like Iceland." "What about Jan Mayen's land?" I asked. "It doesn't look like that either, my boy. This isn't a northern volcano with granite slopes and a skull cap of snow." "All the same..." "Look, Axel, look." Above our heads, not more than 500 feet up, there was a volcano, through which every quarter of an hour, with a loud explosion, there emerged a tall column of flame, mingled with pumice stones, ash, and lava. I could feel the convulsions of the mountain, which seemed to be breathing like a whale and puffing out fire and air through its huge blowers. Below us, on a fairly steep slope, streams of eruptive matter stretched for a distance of 700 or 800 feet, giving the mountain a height of about 1,800 feet. Its base was hidden in a regular bower of green trees, among which I made out olives, figs, and vines laden with purple grapes. I had to admit this was not at all an Arctic scene. When one's gaze passed beyond this green girdle, it plunged away into the waters of an exquisite sea or lake, in which this enchanted land appeared as an island barely a few miles wide. To the east there was a little harbor, with a few houses scattered around it, and some ships of a peculiar kind rocking on its blue waves. Beyond it, some groups of islets rose from the liquid plain in such numbers that they looked like a vast ant heap. To the west, distant coasts lined the horizon. On some of them, gently curving mountains were silhouetted. On others, farther away, there appeared a lofty cone with a waving plume of smoke. In the north, an immense sheet of water sparkled in the rays of the sun, its expanse broken here and there by the top of a mast or the curve of a sail swelling in the wind. The unexpectedness of such a sight increased its wonderful beauty 100-fold. "Where are we? Where are we?" I kept asking in a murmur. Hans closed his eyes with indifference, while my uncle gazed uncomprehendingly. "Whatever this mountain may be," he said at last, "it's rather hot here. The explosions are still going on, and it would be a pity to come safely out of a volcano just to be hit on the head with a piece of rock. Let us go down, and then we shall know where we stand. Besides, I'm dying of hunger and thirst." The professor was definitely not a contemplative character. For my part, forgetting all my needs and fatigue, I could have stayed in that spot for hours. But I had to follow my companions. The sides of the volcano were extremely steep. We kept slipping into regular quagmires of ash, trying to avoid the streams of lava which wound down the mountain like fiery serpents. As we went down, I chattered away volubly, for my imagination was too full not to spill over in words. "We are in Asia," I cried, "on the Indian coast, in the Malay archipelago, in the Oceania. We'd gone across the globe and come out at the antipodes of Europe." "But what about the compass?" asked my uncle. "Yes, of course, the compass," I said with a puzzled air. "According to the compass, we've been traveling north all the time." "Then it was lying?" "Lying? No, how could it?" "Then this is the North Pole." "The pole? No, but..." There was a mystery here, and I did not know what to think. Meanwhile, we were getting nearer to that greenery which was such a treat for the eyes. I was tormented by hunger and thirst. Fortunately, after walking for 2 hours, we reached a lovely stretch of country, entirely covered with olive trees, pomegranate trees, and vines which seemed to be common property. At any rate, in our state of destitution, we were in no mood to be over-scrupulous. What a joy it was to press that delicious fruit to our lips, and to bite off whole clusters of those purple grapes. Not far off, in the delightful grassy shade of the trees, I found a spring of fresh water, into which we joyfully plunged our faces and hands. While we were enjoying the delights of repose in this way, a child appeared between 2 clumps of olive trees. "Ah!" I cried, "a native of this happy land!" He was a poor boy, wretchedly clothed, rather sickly looking, and apparently greatly alarmed by our appearance. Indeed, half naked, with unkempt hair and beards, we looked anything but prepossessing, and unless this was a country of robbers, we were likely to terrify the inhabitants. Just as the boy was about to take to his heels, Hans ran after him and brought him back to us, kicking and screaming. My uncle began by doing his best to reassure him, and asked him in German, "What is the name of this mountain, my boy?" The child made no reply. "Good," said my uncle. "We are not in Germany." Then he put the same question in English. The child still did not answer. I was extremely puzzled. "Is the boy dumb?" cried the professor, who, very proud of his command of languages, repeated his question in French. The same silence. "Then let's try some Italian," said my uncle, and he asked, "Dove noi siamo?" "Yes, where are we?" I repeated impatiently. The boy still made no reply. "Will you answer when you're spoken to?" cried my uncle, beginning to lose his temper and shaking the child by the ears. "Come si noma questo isola?" "Stromboli," replied the little shepherd boy, slipping out of Hans' grasp and running off to the plain through the olive trees. We gave no thought to him. Stromboli! What an effect this unexpected name produced on my imagination. We were in the middle of the Mediterranean, in the heart of the Aeolian archipelago of mythological memory, in that ancient strong isle where Aeolus kept the winds and storms on a chain, and those blue mountains in the east were the mountains of Calabria, and that volcano on the southern horizon was none other than the fierce and frightening Etna. "Stromboli! Stromboli!" I repeated. My uncle accompanied me with his words and gestures, so that we seemed to be singing a chorus. Oh, what a journey! What a wonderful journey! We had gone in by one volcano and came out by another, and this other was more than 3,000 miles from Sneffels, from that barren country of Iceland at the far limits of the inhabited world. The chances of our expedition had carried us into the heart of the most beautiful part of the world. We had exchanged the region of perpetual snow for that of infinite verdure, of the gray fog of the icy north for the blue skies of Sicily. After our delicious meal of fruit and cold water, we set off again in the direction of the port of Stromboli. It seemed to us that it would be unwise to say how we had arrived on the island. The superstitious Italians would undoubtedly take us to be demons vomited out of hell, so we resigned ourselves to passing ourselves off as victims of a shipwreck. This was not so glorious, but far safer. On the way, I heard my uncle murmuring, "But the compass! The compass! It pointed north! How can we explain that fact?" "Good Lord," I said disdainfully. "The best thing to do is to not explain it. That's the simplest solution." "What? A professor at the Johanneum unable to explain a cosmic phenomenon? The idea is positively disgraceful." As he spoke, my uncle, half naked, with his leather money belt round his waist and settling his spectacles on his nose, became once more the awe-inspiring professor of mineralogy. An hour after leaving the olive grove, we reached the port of San Vincenzo, where Hans claimed his 13th week's wages, which were counted out to him with hearty handshakes all around. At that moment, if he did not altogether share our very natural emotion, at least he gave vent to an extraordinary display of feeling. He gently pressed our hands with the tips of his fingers and began to smile. And that's the end of chapter 44. Chapter 45. Home Again. Such is the conclusion of a story where even those people who pride themselves on being astonished at nothing will refuse to believe. But I am hardened in advance against human incredulity. We were received by the Stromboli fishermen with the kindness due to the victims of shipwreck. They gave us food and clothing, and after waiting 48 hours, a small craft took us on the 31st of August to Messina, where a few days' rest removed every trace of fatigue. On Friday, the 4th of September, we embarked on the Volturno, one of the French imperial packet boats, and 3 days later landed at Marseille with nothing on our minds but the problem of our wretched compass. The mystery of its inexplicable behavior plagued me all the time. In the evening of the 9th of September, we arrived at Hamburg. I cannot hope to describe Martha's astonishment and Gräuben's joy at our return. "Now that you are a hero, Axel," my dear fiancé said to me, "you will never need to leave me again." I looked at her, and she smiled through her tears. I leave the reader to imagine whether Professor Liedenbrock's return caused a sensation in Hamburg. As a result of Martha's gossiping, the news of his departure for the center of the earth had spread all over the world. People had refused to believe it, and when they saw him again, they did not believe it any the more. However, the presence of Hans and various pieces of information from Iceland gradually modified public opinion. My uncle then became a great man, and I the nephew of a great man, which is not something to be despised. Hamburg gave a banquet in our honor. A public meeting was held at the Johanneum, at which the professor told the story of his expedition, leaving nothing out but the mystery of the compass. On the same day, he deposited Saknussemm's document in the city archives and expressed his deep regret that circumstances, stronger than his will, had prevented him from following in the Danes' footsteps to the very center of the earth. He was modest in all his glory, and his reputation grew as a result. So much honor inevitably aroused envy. There were some who could not forgive him his fame, and his theories, based on established facts, contradicted scientific doctrine on the question of the central fire. He was obliged to engage in oral and written controversy with scientists all over the world. For my part, I cannot agree with his theory of gradual cooling. In spite of what I have seen, I still believe and always shall believe in the central fire. But I admit that certain circumstances, as yet imperfectly understood, may modify this law under the influence of natural phenomena. While these questions were being fiercely debated, my uncle suffered a real sorrow. Hans, in spite of his entreaties, left Hamburg. The man to whom we owed everything would not allow us to pay our debt in hospitality. He was afflicted with homesickness. "Farewell," he said one day, and with that simple word he left for Reykjavik, where he arrived safely. We were deeply attached to our worthy eider hunter. Though far away, he will never be forgotten by those whose lives he saved, and I certainly intend to see him again before I die. In conclusion, I should add that this journey to the center of the earth created a tremendous sensation all over the world. It was translated into every other language, and the leading newspapers competed with one another in order to publish the most interesting passages, which were commented on, discussed, attacked, and defended with equal conviction on the part of believers and skeptics. My uncle had the rare privilege of enjoying in his lifetime the fame he had deservedly won, and even received an offer from Mr. Barnum to exhibit him in the United States. But a nagging worry, I might almost say a torment, was mingled with all this glory. One aspect of the journey, the behavior of the compass, remained a mystery, and for a scientist, an unexplained phenomenon is a torture for the mind. Fortunately, Providence was to make my uncle completely happy. One day, while arranging a collection of minerals in his study, I noticed the famous compass and had a look at it. It had been there for 6 months in its corner, never suspecting how much worry it was causing. Suddenly, I gave a cry of surprise. The professor came running into the room. "What's the matter?" he asked. "The compass." Well, the needle points south instead of north." "What's that you say?" "Look, the poles are reversed." "Reversed!" My uncle looked, compared the compass with another, and then gave a leap of joy which shook the whole house. Light dawned at the same time in his mind and mine. "So," he exclaimed, as soon as he was able to speak again, "after our arrival at Cape Saknussemm, the needle of this confounded compass pointed south instead of north." "Obviously." "Then that explains our mistake. But what phenomenon could have caused this reversal of the poles?" "It's all very simple." "Explain yourself, my boy." "During the storm on the Liedenbrock Sea, that fireball which magnetized all the iron on the raft simply reversed the poles of our compass." "Ah!" cried the professor, bursting out laughing. "So it was a practical joke that electricity played on us." From that day onward, my uncle was the happiest of scientists, and I the happiest of men, for my pretty Virlandaise, abdicating her position as ward, took her place in the Königstrasse house in the dual capacity of niece and wife. I need scarcely add that her uncle was the illustrious Professor Otto Liedenbrock, corresponding member of all the scientific, geographical, and mineralogical societies in the world. The end. This was a lot of fun, you guys. I really enjoyed reading this book and the previous books that we read, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. We will be taking a break from bedtime stories for a while. Not quite sure when we'll start up again, but I do hope you'll join us. In the meantime, check out some of the other videos that we've been making at the library. A lot of really fun stuff, and we're excited to produce even more in the coming future. With that being said, I hope you are all well. You will stay well, be well, and sleep well.